purple potatoes, blue potatoes, red potatoes with yellow flesh. In trendy restaurants and food blogs, these exotic varieties are treated like culinary novelties, pretty colors to photograph for social media. But here's the uncomfortable truth. While we're busy turning traditional Andean potatoes into Instagram content, the indigenous communities who spent 8,000 years developing these varieties are losing them at an alarming rate. Seeds that represent centuries of knowledge, cultural identity, and spiritual connection are disappearing from the very mountains where they originated. This isn't just about losing crop varieties. It's about the erosion of an entire cultural system where potatoes aren't just food. They're language, identity, spirituality, social structure, and memory. By the end of this video, I'll reveal the one traditional potato practice that seems simple on the surface, but actually contains the entire philosophy of Andean culture, and why its disappearance would mean losing something irreplaceable. But first, we need to understand something most people never consider. In Andean communities, potatoes aren't just grown, they're relatives. In Quechua, the indigenous language spoken across much of the Andes, there isn't just one word for potato. There are dozens. Each variety has its own name, its own personality, its own story. There's Campis, the embraced one, a potato with such a smooth texture it feels like a hug. Pucasunca, red nose, named for its distinctive coloring. Huila Coilu, blood star, with deep red flesh radiating from its center. These aren't scientific classifications, they're family names. In many Andean communities, the relationship with potatoes is described using kinship terms. Potatoes are referred to as siblings, as ancestors, as children to be cared for. This isn't metaphorical. It reflects a genuine belief system where potatoes are part of the family network. During planting, farmers talk to their potato seeds. They ask them to grow well. They thank them for returning. They apologize if the soil isn't as rich as it should be. To an outsider, this might seem quaint or superstitious, but it represents a worldview called Ayllu, a Quechua concept where all beings, human and non-human, exist in reciprocal relationships. In the Ayllu worldview, potatoes aren't resources to be extracted, they're community members with their own needs and gifts. Humans care for potatoes, and potatoes care for humans. The mountains provide conditions for growth, and in return, they receive offerings. Water nourishes the crops, and humans protect the water sources. This reciprocal relationship manifests in daily practice. Potato cultivation is never a solitary activity. It's a communal event that reinforces social bonds. Extended families gather for planting and harvest. Knowledge passes from grandparents to grandchildren not through formal instruction, but through shared work. A grandmother shows her granddaughter exactly how deep to plant a particular variety, at what angle, in what type of soil. She explains which potatoes prefer the southern exposure, which need more water, which can handle early frost. This knowledge can't be found in books. It exists in practice, in relationship, in the continuity of generations working the same land. In the Andean spiritual universe, growing food isn't a purely practical activity. It's a sacred act that connects the human world with the spiritual realm. Central to this worldview is Pachamama, the Earth Mother who gives life to all growing things. Before planting, farmers make offerings to Pachamama: cocoa leaves, alcohol, llama fat, and always potatoes. The first and best potatoes of each harvest are returned to the earth in gratitude. But Pachamama isn't the only spiritual force in the potato fields. The Apis, mountain spirits, control weather, water, and crop success. Each mountain has its own personality, its own preferences, its own relationship with the communities in its shadow. Ritual specialists called Pacos or Altamiseoks perform ceremonies to maintain harmony between humans and these spiritual forces. These aren't occasional events. They're woven throughout the agricultural calendar, marking every significant moment in the potato's life cycle. In June, during the Inti Raymi, Festival of the Sun, communities give thanks for the harvest. In August, they perform rituals for Pachamama before planting begins. In February, they conduct ceremonies to protect growing crops from hail and frost. Even festivals that appear purely celebratory have deep spiritual significance. Potato harvest dances aren't entertainment. They're prayers in motion, stories that teach, rituals that maintain cosmic balance. Potato symbolism appears everywhere in Andean material culture. Traditional textiles incorporate potato flowers and plants in their designs. Pottery vessels are shaped like potatoes. Songs reference potato varieties as metaphors for beauty, reliability, or sustenance. This symbolic importance stretches back millennia. Archaeological sites have uncovered ceramic potato vessels over 1,500 years old, proving that potatoes have been culturally central for as long as complex societies have existed in the Andes. Potatoes don't just feed Andean communities, they organize them. The social structure of traditional Andean villages is literally built around potato cultivation and exchange. Agricultural land is often held communally, with families allocated specific plots based on complex social agreements. These allocations aren't random. They reflect social status, family size, historical contributions, and reciprocal obligations that can span generations. The Andean practice of Ayni, reciprocal labor exchange, centers heavily on potato cultivation. When it's time to plant or harvest, families call in their Ayni network. 20 or 30 people might show up to work your field, knowing you'll return the favor when their time comes. These work parties aren't purely functional, they're social events. People share food, drink chicha, traditional corn beer, tell stories, flirt, resolve disputes, and strengthen community bonds. The potato field becomes a social arena where relationships are negotiated and maintained. Perhaps most fascinating is the practice of Trueque, barter exchange centered on potato diversity. Families don't just grow potatoes for themselves. They grow dozens of varieties specifically to trade with other families, other communities, even other ecological zones. Someone living at 12,000 feet might trade frost-resistant varieties with someone at 14,000 feet for different potatoes that grow better in slightly warmer conditions. Communities in the high Puna grasslands trade with valleys below, creating exchange networks that ensure everyone has access to diverse varieties. This system isn't just economic, it's a sophisticated genetic conservation strategy. By distributing varieties across many households and communities, the risk of losing any particular variety decreases dramatically. If one family's crop fails, the variety survives in other fields. Women often control potato seed selection and storage, giving them significant decision-making power in agricultural matters. This isn't incidental. It reflects the importance of potato diversity to family food security and the recognition that women's knowledge of seed characteristics is essential to survival. Every traditional potato variety represents accumulated knowledge, thousands of years of observation, selection, and adaptation encoded in genetic material. Andean farmers can identify hundreds of potato varieties by sight and touch alone. They know which varieties perform best in specific microclimates, which tolerate drought, which resist specific diseases, which store longest, which taste best in particular preparations. They know that Trueque potatoes are perfect for freeze-drying into chuno because their flesh structure holds up to the process. That Kekarani potatoes make the creamiest soup. That Papa Amarilla has the perfect texture for kausa, a traditional potato dish. This knowledge has enormous practical value. When agricultural scientists look for traits like disease resistance, drought tolerance, or nutritional content, they often turn to traditional Andean varieties maintained by indigenous communities. But here's the crisis. This knowledge system is eroding. Young people migrate to cities. Commercial agriculture favors uniform varieties. Traditional exchange networks weaken, and with them disappears knowledge that can never be recreated. Remember that one practice I promised would reveal the entire Andean cultural philosophy? Here it is. At the end of each harvest, families conduct hallmay potato selection for next year's seed. This isn't just practical. It's a ceremony that embodies reciprocity, continuity, and relationship. Multiple generations participate. Everyone has input. They select not just for size or health, but for color diversity, for variety preservation, for maintaining relationships with potato varieties that might not be the highest yielding, but carry family history or spiritual significance. The selected seeds are wrapped in special textiles, stored in ceremonial locations, sometimes with offerings. They're literally being entrusted with continuing the relationship for another generation. This single practice contains everything: ecological knowledge, understanding which varieties to preserve, social structure, multi-generational decision-making, spiritual connection, ritual treatment of seeds, and cultural continuity, passing forward what was received from ancestors. Today, some Andean communities are deliberately revitalizing these practices. Young people are learning traditional varieties and cultivation methods. Seed exchanges are being reestablished. Cultural knowledge is being documented and transmitted. Because ultimately, preserving traditional potato varieties isn't just about agricultural biodiversity. It's about preserving a complete cultural system where humans, plants, earth, and spirits exist in reciprocal relationship. When we understand potatoes as Andean peoples do, as relatives, as spiritual connections, as social bonds, as living knowledge, we begin to understand what's really at stake in their preservation. It's not just seeds and storage. It's an entire way of being in the world.